So before we begin, I just want to say a few words. First off, a very big thank you to the good people at Furality for making this happen. It's actually my first time doing a panel for a convention, and thank you for making the time to attend this panel. And for today's session, this is just a general introduction to the topic of DJing. I'll be giving out small practices you can do in your free time, breakdowns on what DJs do at work, thought processes in music, along with places you can visit to learn more, some basic knowledge on equipment types, and other things to look out for before getting started on becoming a DJ. Some may feel that the pace may be too fast, but that's okay. Again, this is just a general introduction. So you can feel free to take notes, but you don't actually have to memorize anything or record this session unless you want to. It will all be made available at a later time. In the meantime, please allow me to briefly introduce myself. Hello everybody, my name is Loprov and I'm actually performing next door at Club Fin this weekend, but hey, here I am. Besides being a DJ, I'm a VJ for live shows, sound engineer and music producer for studios, voiceover for ads and guide videos, among other things. If you're curious and want to know more about what I do, I'll leave my socials at the end of the session for you to browse through if you like. On the side that's more relevant to this topic, I teach music production on Ableton and DJing through turntables, CDJs, and controllers in public and international schools, sometimes traveling around to run workshops for companies and enrichment groups as well, and so on. So this workshop was designed by myself to address some of the most commonly asked questions from many of you out there, and I hope this can help you learn a thing or two in some way. Okay, so let's get to it. Okay, so now we put the formalities aside, and since time is of the essence, let's get straight into the topics we'll be covering for today. Think of this as a general introduction to the topic of DJing and what DJs do at work, be it on stage or behind the scenes. Again, you don't have to take notes or record this, it will all be made available at a later time. Most unfortunately, I'm unable to dive into too much details on certain parts of the topic due to time limit for the session, so if you have any questions you want to know more about, you can just drop me a message directly on Twitter or just approach me whenever I'm online in VR. This offer stands valid for those watching this at a later time as well. I always believe that I don't have all the answers compared to many other professionals out there in the field who have far more experience and knowledge than I do, but I will do my best to share as much as I know with you in this session. For starters, we're going to look into what a DJ is, the types of DJ available out there, and a brief history. So a DJ basically stands for disc jockey, and in one way to describe is a person who plays music over loudspeakers to an audience. Now, there's several ways to describe the term depending on the context, but we'll leave that for later on. And on a more relevant note, I'd like to address something that I came across in recent years. Does a DJ need to know how to produce music in order to become a DJ? Now, music production is a very handy set of skills for a DJ to have, especially for those who are looking to spice up their performances and expand on things like their set flows, transitions, short edits, mashups, and even remixing the tracks themselves. It's a really big plus, but not really a must. Just something to consider along the way, and if you have the time, I do encourage you to look into it. Now, to sum this part up, in essence, a music producer makes the music that DJs play. So in the meantime, I have a few general examples to demonstrate the two main categories of where and how DJs fit in. We have the foreground where DJs are considered as the highlight of the event, whereas the background category mostly focuses on other elements of the event, and the DJ's job is to provide background music to venues while ensuring that the silence is filled, either through mixing music or playlist curations. It all starts here, even myself included. Maybe you like the idea of learning about DJing and become a hobbyist while doing it just for fun, or you want to learn and explore avenues of where DJing can take you to. These are some examples on the types of DJs you can see out there from time to time. Maybe you're thinking of playing for parties, clubs, or festivals, be it in VR or other places. Maybe you want to run your own radio show where you engage guests through interviews and hosting chat sessions with audiences on air, or just creating playlists that set the mood for the venue. There's a lot of possibilities out there today, and my first question for you is, what would be your goal if you started on DJing? Because getting to know what your goal will help you shape your understanding on what's needed to help you get there in terms of skills, knowledge, and mentality. Now, there's a lot more going on than just these few points that I've put on the slides. These are just picked out to show you what roughly happened during each period of time. Just a very brief overview of how DJing evolved over the last century, from the first radio DJ broadcast in 1906 to the first known DIY street parties using homemade loudspeakers and a pair of turntables to create non-stop music. And especially over the last few decades, we can see how the world of DJing was built by countless people across the planet, putting a spotlight on this topic, attracting more out there from enthusiasts to industry leaders to contribute. And then came the technology era where DJing was taken to new heights, with one of the first ever professional CD players built and designed for DJs by Pioneer, the CDJ 500, released in 1994. So here's a bit of a story. In the last 20 years, DJs have been dealing with countless stacks and crates of vinyls that could weigh possibly hundreds of pounds for just about 800 songs or so, for example. And with the help of technology, that was greatly reduced to about 10 pounds worth of CDs containing the same amount of tracks, but could fit nicely in a backpack, unlike vinyls where the DJ would literally need flight cases and trolleys for their collections when traveling for gigs especially. So this brought on a new challenge to those in the field. Can we make it even more accessible? And the answer came with the rise of laptop DJs who could quite literally bring their entire music library with them, containing tens and thousands of songs, and that itself in fact was one of the key factors that influenced the very way of how DJs perform at venues today. Now in the past, a classic example I could give would be this one. A club DJ in the early 2000s can zip through anywhere between 20 to 40 or even 50 tracks per hour on set, and that greatly depends on several factors such as the skill level of the DJ on their track selection and equipment handling, be it turntable or CDJ, the crowd's energy, how aggressive the DJ has to go to keep the dance floor, and so on. But now in today's context with the technology that we have, however, a club DJ can cover up to 80 or even 90 songs per hour easily, and that's considered normal. But to be perfectly honest, that's not something that happens all the time. And imagine the next DJ will be standing there and be wondering, I have no more songs to play left, help me. And that's actually based on true stories, unfortunately. So anyway, the point is to show how technology in recent years have allowed professional DJs to actually expand their skill set and knowledge, from creating unique sound effect combinations to even more technical mixing capabilities. And that's just some of the many things out there. The question now is, which ones will you go for, and will your objective be something that could help shape your performance style? I'll leave that one for you to think about. We're now at the second topic of this session, things that a DJ should know at work. A DJ should be well prepared to tackle any and all situations thrown at them, be it a sudden change in hardware right before the show, or a rapid shift in music direction to adapt to the crowd's music preferences. I'll explain a little bit more along the way. These are just some of the many things a DJ should know about, even if the chances of using the knowledge is slim to none. These are song structures. One of the key things a DJ would need to know to make sense in their mixing, aside from considering other factors like is it the same speed and energy, which will be covered later on. This is what most songs would look like when you break it into sections, and these sections will vary depending on the genre and creative output from the composer or artist. Some would also mention along the lines of identifying your phrasing. Now, I made an example to show how this would roughly work later on. Let's take a closer look at two of the most common genres, pop and EDM. To simplify this as much as I can, song structure is used to describe how a song is arranged from various sections. What you see here today are standard arrangements for some of the music you hear today, and for DJs, we use the sections to quickly identify where to mix in and out of without having the transition sound like a disaster. This is a simple exercise you can do in your free time to practice on identifying song structures on your own, and knowing this will help you understand when and where you should mix, so it shouldn't sound like a mess where two singers are fighting for lead position. Okay, so anyway, this will help you understand how DJs identify and mark timings to start and end their mixing for the track. So give yourself some time to learn this. There's absolutely no need to rush at all. And now we move on to the next part, knowing your genre. This is just a general example to show how a genre, and in this case, house music, developed over time. It's to the best I know so far, so I'll say it's not the complete story, and I'm pretty sure there's someone out there who could explain the genealogy of music genres better than I can. So you could see the lines I drew forming connections between some of these subgenres, and then there's more, and there's more, and more, and yeah, you know what? You know what? By the time I finish explaining this one genre, I'll likely look like this to some of you out there. So to sum up this rather lengthy topic, well, you can have something to do. If you're curious enough, I'd like you to take a look at the next slide and visit musicmap.info. the entirety of music history, based on as much as we know, as far as we can cover, based on countless hours of topic research, user contributions, and information verifications, etc. And out of the other visual maps I used to work with, I personally liked what the team behind this website came up with. As you scroll in, you can see the connections between all the genres, and for each name you click on, there's a story behind their development and influences, delivered in a really simple way without all the fuss of having to read through walls and walls of text just to get to a specific part you want to know more about. So instead of me going through this, I'd like you to visit the website when you have time and have a look through based on your interests instead. So we move on to the hardware section where a DJ should know about, and this is an example of what a club setup would look like. Usually we'll have just 2 or 3 CDJs and a mixer in the console, sometimes a pair of turntables provided if the console's built to isolate from heavy vibrations caused by the subwoofers, sometimes a giant controller like the Pioneer DJing S9, for example, but that depends a lot on the resident DJs, a term we use to describe regular DJs who work at the venue either full-time or on a contract basis. And I also left some side info for those who want to understand more about how these equipments are commonly used in a club without going too much into details for now, but we will dive into some of the basic features that you will need to know before working with them. We start with a classic loved by countless around the world, the Technics SL1200 Mark II. Well, there's also several other variations, but we'll not get into that. We'll just stick with the Mark II, okay? So, to very briefly explain how a turntable works, the vinyl have grooves etched into them, forming the lines you can see around the vinyl, a needle on a cartridge that will read the grooves while the vinyl spins at a certain speed and gets converted into electric signals, which later get sent into this amplifier, or in this case, a DJ mixer, boosted to a volume loud enough to hear on speakers. The picture shows the player in a standard layout, but DJs usually would have this positioned vertically with the tone arm facing downwards on the right, and that is also known as the battle-style DJ layout, commonly seen in turntable users, be it in performances or when competing in places like DMC World DJ Championship and Red Bull 3 Styles. So this was back in around 2010 when I first started getting into DJing. So before most of the tech you see and use in your DJ equipment today, like the Reloop RP8000 and Rain 12 for example, it roughly started from this little device in the bottom right corner, the Novation Dicer. It was a choice controller for DJs who work with computers and timecode vinyl or CDs. This was built to address an issue back then where DJs needed a convenient way to recall cue points on songs for faster mixing without having to go on the computer all the time. And this was usually placed on top of where the 45 RPM adapter is with a bit of blue tack or super glue. Please don't use super glue, like that will just rip the paint off the thing anyway. Again, just a reminder that you don't have to memorize everything unless you are really interested. This is just an overview of the types of equipment commonly seen across clubs and event venues. And then came the digital era, and with it was the CDJ. Now, there's a lot more functions that a CDJ can do on its own, so for today I'll just introduce only some of the key features based on what we will be talking about next, and these functions are commonly found in most DJ controllers as well. We start from the right side of the CDJ and look at the tempo slider, then the platter in the center, which is also known as a jog wheel. So we're going to stick to jog wheel for now to prevent confusion. A simple way to look at it is the tempo slider does permanent changes in your tempo, or known as BPM, while the jog wheel does temporary changes, or nudges in this case, where DJs would use it to nudge a track faster or slower to align the beats to the next track. Let's say if it's the same BPM to the next track, but it's now a little bit slower or faster, just a touch, you know, and you need that little bit of push, right? So this is what we would use to actually adjust the track for during mixing or transition or anything goes. And for the tempo range, to put it simply, it's just to tell the tempo slider do not go over or under this specific range in percent. So that's a little bit of math, which I'll explain that in a bit down the road. But for now, I'll just share with you the tempo range. Usually it'll be anywhere between plus minus 6%, sometimes it's 8, sometimes 10, 16, 25, 50, or even 100%. And how do we actually know how many percent to add or minus? It's usually just a little bit of math. If for the more experienced one, it's like, what is 10% out of 128 beats per minute, you know, things like that. So that's for tempo range. Now, a small note to share about the pitch slider is that some DJs may mention the term pitch riding. It's a term for a skill DJs use to speed up or slow down a song to align with another track on the same tempo, commonly known as beat matching, which will be covered later on. And now from the top left, the USB port and SD card slot. They're used by DJs who would have a select number of folders or playlists prepared in advance, and they know they'll be working with this regularly and send it through Rekordbox, then load them into USB drives or SD cards depending on preferences. The main reason for using Rekordbox to prepare, it's really just to get the visual waveform you can see on the display panel shown in this example, along with other information we may need like the key of the track, BPM, artist name, among other information that we put in. So we usually prepare just a few hundred tracks to cover our sets and then some just in case. And right below the SD slot would be the Hot Cue feature. It allows you to recall a specific point in the track so you can play immediately from wherever you marked without having to reload or scrub through the track. This CDJ allows up to 8 Hot Cue store and recall split into 2 pages. You can see the left and right button, and some equipment have 5, some equipment have 4. The amount depends on what equipment and software you work with, as well as how many cues you want to work with. You can decide if you want to have the autoplay feature as soon as you press the Hot Cue button. This can be done through the settings menu on the CDJ. Now, if you looked on the lower left side, you realize that there's another cue button. Now, there's a key difference, and that is between the Hot Cue and this one on the lower left side is that the cue button is a way for DJs to set one point manually. So let me give you an example. Say if you are beat matching, okay, and you think, okay, the track is ready for mixing. You've done your pitch sliding, you did your adjustments, you think, okay, and you can just press this button while the track is still playing to go back to the point that you set. But it will just sit on that marked position you set and not play until you hit the play button. Then there's the track search and search button. Track search skips the track and search helps you scrub through the track basically. You'll notice that most of the things you saw earlier from CDJs and turntables can also be found on these controllers in some way or the other, with more bells and whistles of course. In essence, DJ controllers these days are portable versions of full-size DJ setups. They are user-friendly for both beginners and professionals looking for something simple to set up and use, and much more affordable compared to CDJs and turntables. And when I say simple, I really mean simple. Say for example, I have a private party event and I'm just there in and out for a 2-hour set. So before DJ controllers, I have to push a trolley loaded with a full-size DJ mixer, CDJs, and sometimes turntables, along with my laptop, which usually takes an average of about half an hour or so to set up just the power and audio cables, among many other things like sound checks and so on. Now, I can just bring a standalone DJ controller with a few USB drives in my backpack, plug the power, and be ready in just under 5 or 10 minutes at most. A DJ controller is just as powerful as a CDJ. In the end, it really depends on the DJ if one could use all the features offered to its fullest potential. I would really love to provide more coverage on this, but for now we're just covering the basic features of what DJs use in general. So we'll go on to covering one more thing in the next slide, the mixer and headphone cue. Again, this is just an overview of some of the most common features DJs work with frequently when it comes to mixing music. We'll leave the more advanced features for another time. This is a personal favorite of mine, the Djm S9 by Pioneer, a 2-channel DJ mixer designed in consideration of features DJs would use often but have to go to their computers to access it, as you can see from the big flip switches for the effects, the colored pads for cues and other features along the way, which I'll not get into for now. So all of this was designed to reduce the need to stare at a screen and help DJs focus on their performances. But for today, we're only going to cover the basics like the EQ or equalizer, volume faders, and crossfader. The EQ controls 3 ranges of sound in most DJ mixers. Some have 4, some have 2, some have 5, but most common ones are 3, which controls your lows, mids, and highs. I've given some general examples to show you a rough idea of what each range would control. So volume faders are basically just controlling the loudness of the track during a transition. We usually just work with none or full, that means a top or bottom position for most cases, but for more technical DJs, especially in trance and techno or even STEM mixing and live music productions, for example, they balance out their mixing on volume faders on top of EQing and sound effects, or also known as FX, which we will not be covering in this topic unfortunately. So there's a second way to control the volume, and there is a difference. On a related note, trim, in a simple way to explain, is to control the overall volume of the channel. DJs generally use this to manually correct the track's volume and balance the levels to the other tracks played so it doesn't come out as one sound being softer or louder than the other. While software does provide auto gain to balance it for you and to prevent this issue called redlining where you see this level meter just shoot straight to red, it's best to rely on your hearing to check if the overall volume is acceptable and if there's any distortion. So how to know when to use which ones for volume? If the track is a bit too quiet or loud compared to the other track playing, use the trim. When you're mixing between tracks, however, use the volume faders. And now the crossfader, to put it simply, it allows a DJ to fade between two tracks, and for scratch DJs, or better known as turntablists, rely on this heavily to execute scratch techniques with names like transformer, flare, chirp, crab, orbit, and others, while moving the platter back and forth on a turntable or jog wheel in CDJs. And this is the smaller, simpler version of the S9, is the Djm S9. I'll be using this as an example because it shows the headphone cue very clearly. Most DJ mixers, be it standalone or the one built into your controller, would have this, and if you haven't used this before, go grab a pair of headphones and start using it. In a simple way to explain this, Headphone Cue is used to check your songs like beat matching without playing the track out to loudspeakers. Now imagine there's no computer DJing. All you have is your hearing to do all of the beat matching. This is the one key feature DJs rely on, so your ears are your best friend. Some would probably notice on their equipment that there's this other thing called split cue, and simply put, that allows the DJ to hear the cue channels on one side of the headphones, while the other side plays what's playing through the loudspeakers. We sometimes use that, especially in places where there's no booth monitors, and a booth monitor is just this one or two speaker that plays out the music that's broadcasted across the venue. And yes, it can get really loud in these environments sometimes, so get earplugs. I'm not even kidding about this one. Tinnitus and hearing loss are very serious medical problems you don't want to have as a DJ. So for people who approached me and asked for advice on buying DJ equipment, be it for commercial venues or hobby reasons, I usually ask some of these questions first. DJing, like some hobbies out there, can be pretty expensive, to be honest, but with so many choices out there, we've actually reached a point where there's at least one or two models for everyone with different needs and budgets, a reason why I don't bring up cost factors in my questions anymore. So now that we've briefly went through the hardware section, let's take a look at what software DJs use at work. This is just a general view of what a DJ's software interface would look like. There's a lot more software out there like the Algorithm DJ Pro, Mix spelled with 3 X's, PC DJ Dex, Mix Vibes Crossed, Just, and so on. But for this session, I'll show just the ones that we commonly work with in and out of club and other environments. Each software has its own set of perks and interface layouts that would suit different preferences and performance styles. And here's a tip for those trying to figure out what fits their usage the best. Now prepare a folder of songs on your computer, then put yourself on a 1 or 2 week trial with one DJ suite first. Try them out on a daily basis, from sorting a library to performing on them, then compare your experience between different software to see which one you feel most comfortable using. In other words, go with the one that makes the most sense to you. There's really no best in the market, but what's best for you. In a brief way to put it, most DJ suites will offer something that looks like this nowadays, with the intent of making life easier for DJs, be it from file search to organizing music according to preferences. Now, some of you may notice that various suites has similar layouts, such as the file management view, playing decks, cue points, loop function, and so on. The design is really just to have everything a DJ need at work conveniently shown at all times without having to spend time clicking through stuff in the middle of a performance. The last thing a DJ want to look like is as if they're checking the email in front of 800 people at 2 AM with their faces glued to the computer trying to do something. This happens very often, more often than you think, actually. So something I could share about the convenience factor is the waveform, as you can see at the center top of the screen. It really did save me multiple times when situations like a DJ, for example, before my set, he actually broke my headphones at work, but using the visual waveforms to mix music meant that I had the problem of having my face mostly on the screen instead of engaging the audience. Now, it's a really handy feature to have for certain situations and emergencies, but I would recommend you to keep your eyes on your crowds and use your headphones more. So all that music that DJs have, where do we get it from? So these are just some of the many DJ record pools available out there today. Now, if you try searching DJ record pools, you realize that there's a lot more platforms out there that even I don't know of yet. So each pool has their own sound direction that appeals to different DJs. Your choices largely depends on where and what you want to focus on. You'll want to sit down and go through some of these places at your own pace to understand what these platforms can offer and if they can fit into what you're looking for. So most of these places, excluding SoundCloud, go by a monthly subscription plan. So a tip I can share before you invest on getting a plan is to check out the platform first, build a list of songs you know you're going to work with down the road, and if the list is big enough, say a couple 100 tracks, for example, then you can consider signing on the plan once you find the confidence in saying their music direction will work for the crowds I play to here. In essence, DJs actively work with record pools mainly to expand their libraries, mixing styles, music directions, etc. to tackle different demands and demographics. These places may contain exclusive remixes that can't be found anywhere else, along with things like short edits, BPM transition tools, countdown tools, and so on. Basically things that DJs who don't have music production background could use to spice up their performances, like switching between genres, tone play, wordplay, and other creative ways that they could come up with during their performances. So I stopped working with these DJ record pools a few years ago, since most of my works some of you may have heard are actually prepared by myself instead, where I mostly create my own mashups, tools, edits, remixes, stage openers, etc. And now that we have covered most of what DJs do in the background, let's take a quick look at streaming platforms for DJs. Not all DJs are technical people, so something simple and user-friendly would always be a winner. So this is one example out of many platforms out there available today, but DJs usually go to Mixcloud Live in particular instead of other places because of copyright coverage and also the ease of access when it comes to sending out the links to their shows. So even though there's great platforms like YouTube, Facebook, and Twitch, for example, which are great places to build and connect with fan bases and communities, but unless the music you play are all free from copyright protection, most unfortunately, I am unable to recommend those as viable options for now, and we'll have to leave this part for another time. And now the topic some of you have been waiting for, or not. I had to spend a week figuring out how was I going to compress and deliver 3 days worth of information into just a few slides. So here it is, the basics for you to know about what DJs usually do at work. And just a reminder, you don't have to take notes or record this screen unless you want to. But again, all of this will be made available at a later time, and I'm going to keep saying this. These are just some, but not all, of the most common things a DJ would consider when performing at shows, especially for new places they haven't been to. The point is to get to know your audience, to build the music direction that fits the venue's style and direction, while finding the fine line in between what you want to play and what the audience want to hear. Think of it as a give and take scenario where you give people what they want and you get to play what you like. But of course, that still depends on several factors. Now, if you excuse me, I'm going to hydrate myself while I give you half a minute to read this. Yes, I'm actually serious. And yes, I'm back. I'm going to move on to the next slide from now to talk a little bit more about how DJs select their music on and off set. This is a very summarized view of the music selection thought process where DJs would have when they usually have to consider about several key factors on and off stage. So first we have the key, which nowadays I noticed a lot more people are adopting the Camelot wheel system for their mixing, so I'll just leave the chart here for a general view. Now this will take a fair bit of time to go in depth of how the Camelot wheel system works, so unfortunately I'll have to leave that for another time. And then we have the energy of the track itself, not factoring in the Camelot wheel for now. We'll just look at the track's composition on the mood it gives on its own. Then the DJ will consider about the tempo of the track if it's similar to the current ones playing. Examples I could give would be questions like, is it the same BPM range? Is it worth breaking the set flow to transit into this BPM or genre? Will it sound weird if I push it far beyond its original tempo, among other things? Now, we don't always have to meet all three in this process. Okay, so we usually try to react according to audience response most if not all the time, and keep a balance between this thought process and the audience, because bluntly at the end of the day, if the audience does not understand what you're trying to do, then to them it's just gonna be, does it sound good or bad? So aside from the processes I shared earlier, what about the skills involved? This is a standard cycle of what a DJ does at work most, if not all the time. The next few slides will be breaking down each of these points with a little bit more details to share with you on what to consider and what you can do right now if you intend to become a DJ. Okay, please excuse the wall of text, but these are just some of the questions that DJs will consider when going in and out of their track selection process. There's a bunch more to consider, there's a time and place for these questions to be considered of, but I decided to put them all into one list and show the most common ones as a general view. For example, you're putting 10 genres into 1 hour for performance. So you should focus your consideration from an audience's perspective and ask yourself questions like, will the vast changes between genres, an example rock to hip-hop, sound abrupt or smooth to listen to? Do my friends know about this? Things like that. Now, if a song is a do not play, find out the reason behind it and what else is similar sounding in terms of lyrics and other similarities in terms of music-wise, then make mental notes to avoid them. Now, believe it or not, fights breaking out at venues are some of the things that can actually happen whenever a do not play song is aired, or the song is generally hated by the audience that they'll walk off and does this thing DJs call clearing the floor. That's the last thing anyone would want, and if there's none to take note of, you're generally pretty safe and you can just focus more on entertaining the audience as usual. Now, there's a lot more examples I can give when it comes to track selection, but we'll stop here for now. Think of this as a general starter since different DJs have different thought processes according to the factors they face, the environments they're going to be playing for, and other things. Now, here's some practice you can do wherever you go. Every place can be a place for you to learn about how others set the mood with the help of some music. I mean, imagine going to a restaurant and you're just eating in absolute silence and it's just background noise coming from everything happening around you. Like planning DJ sets, curating playlists for venues are just as important. You don't hear speedcore at a fancy restaurant, but if you do though, do let me know, like take a video and send me. I want to see that. I'm not kidding, I'm serious. Okay, so now we move on to the next part, beat counting. There are 4 beats in a bar, but for convenience reasons, DJs tend to count in 8s, which is also correct. This counting method is based on the 4/4 time signature, which can also be found in most music you hear today. Both are correct, just a matter of preference for this one. Now, combining with song structure we just covered earlier, you can try this with songs you listen to frequently in your free time. You want to do this verbally first, then mentally. So say for instance, 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, and so on. Eventually, you'll find yourself being able to do beat counting without having to think much, which will help you quickly identify how many bars are there in a section of a track, which will aid you in deciding when and where to start mixing and when to finish your transitions. Earlier on, I mentioned briefly about making sense of phrasing. This is based on a very common mixing technique you can hear in most places, and the main reason for this technique is to avoid vocal clashing. This is the verse-chorus mixing technique, broken down in a very simplified format. Unfortunately, I won't be able to show video demonstrations of this for now due to time, but this is a very simplified breakdown of what usually happens when a DJ mixes songs. Okay, so for this practice, it would be great if you can get your hands on a controller to practice, but if you can't, that's okay too. You can work with software and do it from the interface instead. For a general reference, a DJ usually takes anywhere between 4 to 10 seconds to prepare a song for mixing, depending on their performance style, skill level, and preference. You can use this time range as a benchmark to see how fast you can prepare your track when beat matching, but don't rush. Now, like I shared earlier, without going too much into technical details, think of EQ, known as equalizer, as a way to help you balance how 2 tracks will sound when played together at the same time. For example, 2 bass-heavy tracks played concurrently may come out distorted, muffled, or worse still, the bass from both tracks cancel each other out. This is also known as phasing when 2 frequencies are too close to each other. In most cases, DJs generally use clock positions to communicate clearly and quickly on what positions to set the dials to. Say for instance, the engineer is doing a sound test. The person can just go set 2 o'clock for master out or cut off the lows, and the DJ will immediately know what to do. We're gonna have a brief look into how the features highlighted in the slides are used in mixing. The next one will be a little bit more detailed, but don't worry, you don't have to memorize anything. It's just a general example of how mixing would look like when you break it down. For time reasons, I'm going to cover both mixing and transition in a single slide to show you a rough step-by-step breakdown on what a DJ does during mixing and transition using count of 4 beats. It may look like a lot is going on over here, but when the process is broken down, it's actually a lot simpler than you think once you put it into practice. Now, on a side note, you will notice that I highlighted the first beat of every bar, and DJs count it this way, sometimes in 8s, to note how many bars there are in the section that they're counting, mixing, and transiting from and to. I understand that some might find all of this rather difficult to understand without any video examples shown, but you can take the information here and apply it onto the DJ sets you listen to, then learn from there as well. So before I wrap this chapter up, I just want to say that different DJs will have different explanations for whatever I've shared so far. Some may disagree, some may have different views, and I very much respect that regardless. Ultimately, your goals will shape your learning processes and journey as a DJ, and in some ways even influence the events you play for in the future, be it in VR or your local venues. And now finally, general tips on what else to look out for, be it promoting yourself, preparing yourself, the mentality you should have as a DJ, and etiquettes. This is the last chapter of today's general introduction to the topic of DJing and you. Posters and album covers are great ways to show your audience on who's behind the name, while visual elements in there based on the themes and genres of your sets can help attract others who are wondering if they should hit that play button on your uploads. DJs are generally their own marketers unless the DJ has a team of people to work with. If not, most usually would just do things on their own, like marketing, PR, content creation, market survey, and so on. There's a lot more that we do in the background than we do in the foreground, to be honest. And here's some examples I made in the past, and something I don't really talk about much is that in my free time, I actually deal with digital design and motion graphics for production companies, creative agencies, and other clients I have in a few regions. So for those who want to explore options on creating visual designs for their promotional campaigns, be it doing it yourself or working with someone who does design work, I've prepared some points for you to consider in the next couple of slides. These are just some more examples of how you can present your style in a visual format to attract viewers to the stage area. Think of them like eye candies played on very big screens. Imagine communicating with your audience without talking. How will you do that aside from music? Okay, wait for it. Okay, and here comes the wall of text. You can just read it through briefly for now. You are your own brand. I'm sorry for the wall of text, by the way. You are your own brand. Take as much time as you need to go through some of these questions, regardless if you plan to do this for the long run or not. And just lightly touching on the music collection part, believe it or not, your music library and your willingness to adapt to different scenarios will determine the venues you get to perform at, and it's a sizable reason why DJs always expand their libraries and skill set to maximize their chances of getting more gigs out there in the market. The answers you have from some of these questions will determine a lot on your strategy to build your own community or fan base, both actively and passively. So take your time to think about your approach for starters. Some might wonder why I didn't cover much more such as marketing tactics in this session. The focus here is mainly on developing yourself as a DJ. And also because time, you know. So yeah, on to the next slide. I'm sorry, there's going to be walls of text from this point onwards, but these are just some general ideas I'm putting out here related to building your own community or fan base. Connect with your audience who show their support for you. Party with your crowd. I cannot stress that enough. And when it comes to skill sets, there's a saying that two DJs can have the same 10 songs, but both DJs would play it differently and often in their own ways. How DJs come up with their own signature styles often come from not just years of practice, but the willingness to experiment with different things during practice or even live shows. So keep an open mind and try everything. And now when it comes to preparing yourself, be it for your first gig or not, it's important to cultivate habits that help you perform at your best. Prepare your sets on multiple formats in case of problems. For example, if you're a CDJ user, instead of having just one USB drive, you can prepare a few of the same just in case things like the CDJ link dropped out and suddenly the other decks connected can't read off the shared deck, or you have multiple folders prepared for different sections of your performance. For laptop DJs, bringing your own DVS box can help avoid a number of problems. For example, the venue's DVS box is too old that you can't connect with your software. Now, there's a lot of other examples I can give when it comes to preparing for emergencies and troubleshooting for DJs, but we'll leave that for another time. And spending some time at the venue you're about to perform at can help you understand and learn about the types of crowds that go there, what kind of music are played at which hour, what's hot and what's not in music, and so on. You can also take this time to observe the stage area and see what you can and cannot do. For instance, there's not enough space for 2 laptops to do a seamless handover, so you have to figure out another way to transit from the previous DJ without causing this issue DJs are afraid of and call dead air, where there's basically people all over the place but no music at all, and you can imagine how awkward it's going to be when it's like a couple hundred people just standing there like, wait, where's the sound? So what do we do now? So anyway, a sound check is a must for DJs to ensure that everything is in good working order, and also to find out what you should and should not do on your set from a technical perspective. So if you're unsure about this, you can always check in with the in-house technician or engineers or even the managers to find out more. Having pre-recorded sets on you is something not many talk about, but it's acknowledged as a handy thing to have in the event that there's a problem during your set, be it technical or other reasons. And this is usually done to avoid dead air while the problem is being resolved by the in-house engineers or technicians, or even yourself, you know. And please, I can't stress this enough, please have ample rest, food, water. Those who are in the field will know what I'm talking about. Work exhaustion is a very real problem, and it does happen to the best of us, be it DJ or not. A DJ can take up to 3 gigs a night depending on factors, and it can be mentally exhausting after going through hours and hours of loud music. And this is also known as listener's fatigue. You could go search it up online and read about it. And finally, back up your stuff. Then back up that backup which backed up your stuff, and then back up, yeah, you get the idea. So more backups better than none. Okay, so short story. I was at work with a friend. About half an hour before his show, his laptop died, and with it was about 30,000 songs or so, just gone, just like that. And his backup USB drives refused to work with the CDJs on that night, so, well, I had to go take over. You can avoid data loss as long as you do your backups regularly. For example, Time Machine for Macs, or manually just copying the folders into external drives. I mean, there's a lot more solutions out there. I'm pretty sure there's some robust solutions for backups, but we're just going to cover just these couple of ideas in general so you can get the idea of how serious this topic can become actually. So please do your backups. And when it comes to mentality and etiquette, these are just some things I can share with you in general. When I say team performance, I mean knowing who's doing what and how all of you can complement each other's music direction. The standard arrangement for DJs at an event or club usually starts with warm-up DJs to start the event, then the pre-main will start getting people into the mood to party, then the main and the closing act to end the night. So take your time, do your homework on music trends, learn more about the trade and what's coming next, and reach out to listeners for feedback on their thoughts when they heard your set for your own learning purposes. Listen to your own sets from a neutral standpoint and take notes on parts you hear that can be improved. Mistakes are unavoidable. Even professionals have bad moments sometimes. See the mistakes as opportunities to learn instead of beating yourself up over it senselessly while you're on set. And expand your music directions as a DJ. It can and will eventually lead you to more gigs in different environments with different demographics, allowing you to explore and learn even more down the road. Okay, the last wall of text. This is the last wall of text, okay, I promise. So, anyway, 1. Be respectful to people, seriously. For example, don't go up to a DJ in the middle of their set and tell them how they should perform, or point out in front of others when there's no one at the dance floor on their set. Don't tell a DJ what to avoid playing just because you want to play it instead. Don't harass the attendees for free drinks. I hope I don't have to go into details on this one. Just be respectful to people, okay? And number 2, as shared earlier, on some ways you can gear yourself up and prevent issues on your set. It really doesn't hurt to prepare a couple more USB drives or something along the way, because you'll never know if any one of these preparations would come in handy in the times of need. Number 3, know what your role entails, what you should and shouldn't play according to the role that you're assigned. That's very important, okay? For example, warming up the crowd is one of the most crucial tasks as a warm-up DJ. And number 4, song requests are common. Be polite and just take notes, but you don't always have to entertain them, especially if it's going to wreck your set flow. If the customer starts being pushy about the request and harass you, just call security and show them the door. But if you're able to fit the song request into your set somehow, by all means go ahead, and you probably just made someone their night. Number 5, party with the crowd. Enjoy yourself as much as your crowd does. I know some DJs out there can be quite tense from being nervous, so just stand there on stage half the time. But just remember, the crowd is there to have a great time, and you too should have a great time with them. Okay, for number 6, I never imagined I have to bring this up, but please treat a venue's equipment with care, especially if it's shared among other DJs. Imagine someone broke something right before you took over and you only discovered it much later halfway through your performance. Okay, that's really messed up, don't do that, okay? Please take care of the equipment and it will take care of you. And number 7, unless there's an emergency that you need to set up your equipment halfway through someone else's set and you've been given approval to do so, please don't do this. It's disruptive to the DJ on set and sometimes may even cause things like technical problems. Okay, so always get assistance if there's an actual emergency that needs you to do this. And yes, this is one of those jobs where we are technically granted to drink on the job with customers or by ourselves, and we're given like 3 or 4 drinks or maybe a certain X amount of budget. But no, you're there to work. Okay, so once your set is over, you can do as you please. But until then, it is considered unprofessional to be drunk on set, even if you think you can handle your alcohol limit. And number 9, sometimes we may encounter moments where the last DJ overruns into the next DJ's set time, sometimes a good 10 or even 20 minutes. And even if that happens and if you are affected, be the bigger person and don't overrun your set to help keep the rest of the schedule on track. Think of the bigger picture. And the last point for today, the DJ booth is not your house. It is a place of work. Don't bring people into the console unless it's granted by the head DJ or organizer, and these people know when they enter the booth, they don't disrupt the DJ on set. I mean, there's just a lot more things to cover on this, but these are just some to share in general on what you can consider. And we are almost at the end of this session. Now, before I move on, I just have a few parting words. Play every set like it's your last ever. Be it your first gig or not, as soon as you set foot onto that stage, give it your very best on every set, be it for 5 or 5,000 people. Because our goal as DJs is to let people have a good time through music. And don't forget to enjoy the process yourself. Do it because you want to and it makes you happy. Everything else will eventually fall into place down the road. Most unfortunately, there's not enough time for a live Q&A session here today, but I will be answering questions on Twitter and other platforms as well. You can tag me or just send in your questions by DM. I will let you know how you can reach out to me at the end of this panel. And we have come to the end of this panel. I hope the contents here helped you in some way. Again, I do have to apologize for zipping through the slides for some, but I'd like you to think of it as just a general overview of what DJs do here today. While I was updating the presentation, I actually prepared a series of video examples from turntables to CDJs and controllers even. But I had to hold that thought because of the amount of information to cover, as you can see, in under just 1 hour. I will say this one last time for those watching it live right now, all of this will be made available at a later time, so you can watch it again. Don't worry if you missed anything out here today. Don't be shy and feel free to reach out through my socials if you have questions or feedback. I will do my best to respond to each and every one of you. And just a reminder that this offer is also valid to those watching this in the future as well. With all that said, once again, a very big thank you to the good people of Furality for having me here today, and all of you watching this as well. My name is Loprov, thank you for your time, and I'll see you around.